Now on to the father of the Niben. Father of the Niben, translated and with commentary by Florin Jalil. Introduction. Writing the biography of anyone is a challenge. Usually the problem lies with assessing one's sources, comparing the prejudice of one chronicle versus another. Wagen Yorth, I had been told, in writing his well-regarded series of The Wolf Queen of Solitude, used over 100 contemporary narratives. I cannot complain about my task having a similar issue. There is but one record of a man called Topel, the pilot, the earliest known Aldemar explorer of Tamriel. Only 4 short verses fragments of the epic Father of the Niben have survived to the present day, but they offer an interesting, if controversial, look at the Middle Merethic era when Topel the pilot may have sailed the seas around Tamriel. Though Father of the Niben is the only written record of Topel the pilot's voyages, it is not only proof of his existence. Among the treasures of the great crystal tower of Somerset Isles are his crude but fascinating maps, his legacy to all Tamriel. The translation of the Aldemari Udhendra Nibenu, Father of the Niben, is my own, and I accept that other scholars may disagree with some of my choice of words. I cannot promise my translation lives up to the beauty of the original. I have only strived for the simple coherence. Fragment 1. Second ship, the Pasquinal, manned by pilot Loy, was to follow the southern pointing Waystone, and the third, the Niben, manned by pilot Topel, was to follow the northeast pointing Waystone. The orders from the crystal tower there were to sail forth for 80 moons and then return to Tel. Only Niben returned to First Hold, laden high with gold and spice and fur and strange creatures. Dead and live, though alas, old Enofe, Topel, never found, he told the tales of the lands he had visited to the wonderments of all. For 66 days and nights he sailed over crashing waves of dire intent past whirlpools, though mist that burned like fire, until he reached the mouth of the great bay, and landed on a sun-kissed meadow of gentle dells. As he and his men rested, there came a fearsome howl, and hideous orcs streamed forth from the murky glen, cannibal teeth clotted with gore. For centuries, strange crystalline balls were unearthed at the sites of the ancient Aldemar shipwrecks and docks, and particular artifacts of the Merethic and Dawn eras that puzzled archaeologists until it was demonstrated that each had a tendency to rotate on its axis in a specific direction. There were 3 varieties, one that pointed southward, one that pointed northeast, and one that pointed northwest. It is not understood how they work, and they seem attuned to particular lines of power. These are the waystones of the fragment, which each of the pilots used to point their craft in the direction they were assigned to go. A ship with a name not mentioned in the fragment took his vessel northwest, towards Thras and Yukura. The Pasquinel took the southern waystone and must have sailed down toward Piandonia. Topel and his northeast waystone found the mainland of Tamriel. It is clear from this fragment that the 3 ships were assigned to find a passage back to old Ebnofe, so Eldmir, now living in the Somerset, could learn what became of their old homeland. As this book is intended to be the study of Topel the pilot, there is scarcely room to dedicate to different theories of the Aldemari exodus from old Ebnofe. If I were using this poem as my only source, I would have to agree with the scholars who believe that in the tradition that several ships left old Ebfane and were caught in a storm. Those who survived found their way to Somerset Isle, but without their waystones they did not know the direction their homeland was. After all, what other explanation is there for 3 ships heading in 3 opposite directions to find a place? Naturally, only one of the ships returned, and we do not know if either or both of the other 2 found old Ebnofe, or perished at sea or at the hands of ancient Pydenoians, Slode, or Vukandans. We must assume, unless we think the Aldmir particularly idiotic, there at least one of them must have been pointing in the right direction. It may well have been Topil, and he simply did not go northeast far enough. So Topil, setting sail from the first hold, heads northeast, which coincidentally is the longest one can travel along the Abessian Sea without striking land of any kind. Had he traveled straight east, he would have struck the mainland somewhere in what is now the Colavian west of Saradil in a few weeks. Had he traveled southeast, he might have reached the hump of Valenwood in a few days. But our pilot, judging by his own and our modern maps, sailed in a straight line northeast through the Abessian Sea and into the Lilig Bay before touching ground somewhere near present-day Anticlair in 2 months' time. The rolling verdant hills of the southern high rock are unmistakable in this verse, recognizable to anyone who has been there. The question, of course, is what is to be made of his apparent reference to orcs occupying the region. Tradition has it that the orcs were not born until after the Aldemir had settled the mainland, but they sprung up as a distant race following the famous battle between Trimunic and Bothia at the time of Resdawn. It is possible that the tradition is wrong. Perhaps the orcs were an aboriginal tribe predating the Aldemiri colonization. Perhaps these were a cursed folk. Orsimer is the Aldemis, the same word for orc of a different kind. Whose names was to be given to the orcs in a different era. It is regrettable that the fragment ends here, for more clues to the truth are undoubtedly lost. What's missing between the first fragment and the second is appreciable. It must be more than the 80 months that have passed, because Topil is on the opposite side of the mainland of Tamriel now, attempting to sail southeast to return to first hold after his failure at finding old Ebfanay. Fragment 2. No passage westward could be found in the steely cliffs. They jutted up like giant's jaw, so that the Niben sailed south. As it passed in sandy forested island that promised sanctuary and peace, the crew cheered in joy. Then exhalation turned to terror as a great shadow rose from the trees on a leathered wings like a unfurling cape. The great bat lizard was large as a ship, but good pilot. Topel merely raised his bow and struck it in his head. As it fell, he asked his bow son, "Do you think it's dead?" And before it struck the white-bearded waves, he shot once more its heart, to be certain. And so for another 40 days and 6, the Niben sailed south. We can see that in addition to Topel's prowess as a navigator, cartographer, survivalist, and raconteur, he is a master of archery. It may be poetic license, of course, but we do have archaeologist proof that the Merithic Aldemar were sophisticated archers. Their bows of layers of wood and horn drawn by silver silk thread are beautiful, and still I have heard experts say, millennia later, very deadly. It is tempting to imagine it is a dragon, but the creature that Topel faces at the beginning of their fragment sounds like an ancestor of Cliff Racer of present-day Morrowind. The treacherous cliff coastline sounds like the region around Necrum, and the island of Gorn may be where the nest of the bat lizard is. No creatures like that exist in eastern Morrowind, to my knowledge, at the present day. Fragment 3. The fetid evil swamplands and their human lizards retreated to the east, and Topel of his men hearts were greatly gladdened by the sight of the diamond blue, pure sweet ocean. For 3 days they sailed in great cheer northwest, where first hold beckoned them, but hope died in horror as land like a blocking shield rose before them. Topel the pilot was sore wroth and consulted he the maps he had faithfully drawn to see whether best to go south, where the continent must end, or take the river that snaked through a passage north. North, he cried to his men. North we go now, fear not north. Tracing Topel's movements, we see that he skirted to the edge of Morrowind and delved into southern Blackmarsh, seemingly determined to follow his waystone as best as he can. The swamp he is leaving is probably near present-day Gideon. Knowing what we now know about Topel's personality, we can understand his frustration in the bay between Blackmarsh and Elsweyr. Here is a man who follows his orders explicitly and knows that he should have been going southeast through riverways to reach First Hold. Looking for the maps, we can see that he attempted to find passages through and as he has mapped out the inner sea of Morrowind and several of the swampy tributaries of Black Marsh, no doubt being turned away by the disease and fierce Argonian tribes that dissuaded many other explorers after him. With the modern map of Tamriel in hand, we can see that he makes the wrong choice in electing to go northeast instead of pushing southward. He could not have known then that what he perceived to be the endless mainland was only a jutting peninsula. He only knew that he had traveled too far southward already, and he had made a smart but incorrect decision to go up the river. It is ironic that this great miscalculation could today bear his mark of history. The bay he thought was an endless ocean is now known as Topol Bay, and the river that took him astray shores, name of his boat, the Niben River. Fragment 4. The cat demons of 4 legs and 2 ran the river's length, always keeping the boat in their green-eyed sight, hissing and spitting and roaring with rage. But the sailors never had to brave the shores, for fruit trees welcomed them, dropping their arms down on the river's edge as if to embrace the mere, and the men took the fruit quickly before the cats could pounce. For 11 days they traveled north until they came to a crystalline lake and 8 islands of surpassing beauty and peace. Brilliant, flightful creatures of a glorious color greeted them in Aldemari language, making the mare wonder until they understood that they were only calling back the word that they were speaking without understanding it, and then the sailors laughed. Topol the pilot was enchanted with the islands and the feathered men who lived there. There the Niben stayed for a moon, and the bird men laughed how to speak their own words, and with talent feet to write. In joy for their new knowledge, they made Topol their lord, giving him their islands for the gift. Topol said he would return someday, but first he must find the passage east to First Hold, so far away. The last fragment is bittersweet for a number of reasons. We know that this strange, friendly, feathered people the pilot encounters will be lost. In fact, this poem is the only one that mentions is made that the bird creatures of Cyrodiil. The literacy that Topol gives them is evidently not enough to save them from their eventual fate, likely at the hands of the cat demons, who may assume are ancient Khajiit. We know that Topol and his crew never find a route from the 8 islands, which are the modern-day imperial city, through the Lilac Bay. His maps tell the tale where his last poem cannot. We see his hands as he traces a route to the Niben to Lake Rumer, and after attempting a few tributaries which do not lead him where he wants to go. We can imagine Topol's frustration and that by his long-suffering crew as they return back down the Niben to Topol Bay. There they evidently discovered their earlier mistake, for we see that they pass the peninsula of Elsewhere. Eventually they travel along its coastline, past the shores of Valenwood, and eventually home. Usually epic tales end with a happy ending, but this one begins with one, and then means to which it was accomplished is lost. Besides the extraordinary bird creatures of the present day of Cyrodiil, we have caught glimpses of ancient orcs, perhaps, ancient cliff racers, ancient Argonians, and in this fragment, ancient Khajiit. Quite a history in a few lines of simple verse, all because a man failed to find his home and took all the wrong turns to retrace his steps back. Alrighty, I will see you in the next one.